Hey everybody, it's Carm here, back outside. It doesn't feel like I was out here that long ago, at least in a video. I think it was maybe early November, and having a little spell of Indian summer. But yeah, it's official spring now, and it feels great, and soaking it up, and yeah, just wanted to come back out here and talk about an album which I don't believe I've really featured before. Maybe just in passing. Very much a touchstone in every way. I think we think of our touchstone albums as being something that introduced us to different artists, different styles, different approaches. In this case, it really took, you could say, different categories. Although in this particular case, I really learned for the first time in a deeper way, in a more illustrated way, really kind of turned that notion upside down of categorizing, or broke that down to where you're no longer thinking of in terms of those divisions, which a lot of times are rather maybe arbitrary or by default. We have to slot them somewhere, or we need a certain reference point sometimes to point towards someone or show someone where to go with certain music. But this group really broke all that down for me, and came at a perfect time as I was getting deeper into music after just a few years of really starting to explore in a deeper way. And that's Oregon in concert. Bought as a blind/deaf buy back in summer of 1994. Just graduated high school. It's about the middle of summer. It went to a shop which I'd only been to a couple other times. Now, I was vaguely familiar with one of the artists on here, just a little bit, but for the most part wasn't very familiar with the group. I'd seen them in another place a couple of years earlier, called Chicago Digital, which is an all CD store, which is still in existence, and they were in the New Age section. Speaking of sort of default or arbitrary placements of music, where I think a lot of things were slotted in there, for those reasons. They were in the New Age section, which I thought was interesting. And by the way, that was also an area which I was exploring at the time, being that, a lot of this, again, the things I was getting into just happened to be slotted in there. Being that they were a group and not just an individual artist, which is normally what I would find in there, that intrigued me. So I always kept them in mind, although I didn't go for them at the time. And when I came across this, for a very reasonable price, I thought, yeah, I'm going to go for it. So of course, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the group, and I know there's a lot of fans out there of Oregon, both the individual members and the group itself. I do a quick introduction. For those not familiar, you have Paul Mccandless, various woodwinds, primarily in these days. This was recorded in 1975, Vanguard. Primarily oboe and English horn. Ralph Towner, classical and 12-string guitars and piano, among other instruments. The chief composer of the group, though not the leader, I wouldn't say. Really, another thing I had learned too is this is a real example, a great illustration of true democracy in music. Regardless of who wrote the tune, it always became theirs, very unified as a whole, and the whole sound really belonged to them together. And you also had Colin Walcott, the late Colin Walcott, long since, sitar and tabla, among other instruments, and Glenn Moore, bassist, among other instruments, which you can see here. Only a small percentage of what they play overall, is represented on the album. And this is a live one from 1975. But I really learned from hearing this for the first time that so many things were possible in music, and how it's approached. And improvisation plays a huge part in what they do. Well, starting in, you have the spoken introduction by George Schutz. Then you have Become, Seem, Appear, credited to the whole group. Something that they had done really pretty much on all their albums, most of them, was to have a piece or two that was credited to the group. Sometimes it would be more of a loose framework composition, and other times it was completely free, as freely improvised as you could imagine, really with very little anything preconceived. And speaking of kind of bitonal ambiguity of instruments where you're not quite sure who's playing what, you had a lot of that with them, even with very different instruments, like classical woodwinds with sitar, say, or bowed bass, in woodwind, or something Ralph was doing on a brass instrument. You heard a lot of that on here as well, where the differences and the similarities were highlighted in the way they colored things was very distinctive and seemed to open things up. But this piece is very much a little bit more on the composed side. But you also have the way they kind of emerge together. It's so natural and organic, and it was a very powerful introduction musically to them, because again, you really didn't know how to describe it or categorize it. You could say, well, it has kind of a classical feel, or it's improvisational, but it doesn't sound like jazz. It doesn't sound like a lot of the things that they were slotted as. But it's a very powerful statement to begin. Then you have Summer Solstice, Ralph Towner, where again you hear his compositional approach very much fleshed out here. A very melodic writer, very distinctive melodies, without them being too catchy or what you could say would be an earworm. It stays with you in a way, but not such in a way that it kind of nags at you. You want to hear more. And of course it's written in such a way that lends itself to further elaboration. And of course his own approach is so distinctive to his guitars. Classical guitar, even saying he wanted to approach it like the Bill Evans trio, in those terms of melody, harmony, and rhythm, being able to do all those things at once. And of course his 12-string, very raw and otherworldly. And on here you hear it kind of mixed in at times with Colin's sitar, again with that kind of ambiguity. It's like, who's playing what? That made it really intriguing. So again, hearing his melodic sense with that improvisation was a real ear opener. Just that blend. Undertow, Paul Mccandless, mainly a duo with Glenn Moore, where he's playing bass clarinet, which was not an instrument I was very familiar with at the time, but though it came to be one of my favorites to listen to, and plays with almost reckless abandon at times, in ways that I hadn't heard as much from him. Usually he's more restrained, but even when he's playing very with great dynamic and very effusively, on there he just kind of really cuts loose, along with Glenn. And then starting in the second side, you have A Silence of the Candle, beautiful, beautiful song, kind of considered almost a standard in a way, by Ralph, and others have played it as well. And something they've done over the years is reprise a lot of songs. Going back to the beginning, a lot of their albums, they'll play newer versions of it, and still find fresh approaches to it. So this is my introduction to it, at nearly 10 minutes long. And this starts in with Ralph's 12-string and Colin's sitar, also playing sympathetically along with almost kind of like a tambura drone, but taking the melody, which for me that was the first time hearing sitar played in that way. By Western musicians, but kind of blurring that line between the approaches, and one of those things, very romantic, very beautiful, but never cloying or never too syrupy. It just had that right approach. And of course, hearing oboe and English horn played in that way by Paul, again, very melodic, very expressive, but also a great sense of balance there with what the others were doing. Now, as far as musical extremes, Triton's horn, credited to the whole group here, this is where it really gets free, and they make the use of the kind of multi-instrumentarium, I guess you could say, where everyone's just kind of going for it. It almost has this feel of they're at, like, each of them are at a certain station, or like a little hub, and they switch spots, almost like in a sense you could say like musical chairs, or they're kind of almost like a system, although not really a predetermined system, where they're going from one spot to another, switching instruments as they go, maintaining the flow of the music, but yet it still has that real sense of fractured chaos, but it's chaos that's drawing you in, I find, rather than repelling you, even though I wasn't quite ready for that sort of thing over 25 years ago. You wanted to hear more just because of the immediacy of what they were doing. And again, kind of wondering who's playing what. There were times when Paul's oboe and Glenn's bowed bass, they sounded like the same thing, really. And a lot of kind of a call and response. This little picture here, kind of picture within a picture, kind of illustrates that, where it sounds like they're kind of crossing together. It almost seemed like, if you ever seen like a Venn diagram, where they're just kind of barely they're kind of overlapping that certain way. It's like an expanding and contracting, quickly and with more frequency, and then they just splinter apart, and then they go right into the next piece, which is something they did, having seen them live, which is fascinating to see, going from a free improvisation to a very structured piece. The Ralph Towner original, very lilting, very pleasant, and on the surface it sounds almost kind of, I wouldn't say backgroundy, but as it builds up, you could kind of hear, an increasing amount of tension, again, within the group and the way they're interacting. And on here also, Ralph, this is the only piece that he plays piano on, which normally it's a little more balanced from album to album, and you really hear how good he is on there. Maybe the closest thing to what you could call jazz, or that kind of improvisatory approach, but yet he just carries it along into another realm. And Paul's oboe, again, he's taking the lead and just kind of carrying us home. And it's just a fascinating performance and introduction to them, which, as ever, I feel like I'm not saying much of anything or really doing justice to what this music is meant to me, and just the way it's washed over me since then. But it was a great introduction to what they've done, and again, just breaking down that whole notion of really trying to categorize something or make those kind of discernments. Again, we do it for a reference point, and to sort of kind of give little markers for other people to kind of where to go from here. But really, with them, it just you just want to let all that go and just let it wash over you if you're open enough to hearing it. So it was a fantastic introduction. And real quick, I'll just share a little aside about the signatures here. I got to see them live in September of 2002. Wonderful show. It was at a place called Martyrs on near the north side of town, where I've been to a lot of shows since then, including them. They've played there a few times. Perfect venue for them, nice size and everything. And I got there quite early, and Ralph and Glenn were sitting on the stoop of the place right next to the venue, just hanging out. I think Ralph was having a smoke, and they're just sitting there. And here I am with this album under my arm, just running across them. They're just sitting there, and I was just, quite struck, to say the least. I had met very few musicians who I'd been a fan of before, and it was especially at that time painfully shy. But they're right there, and I'm right here, so I have to say something. And I have their album, so I introduced myself and just told them how much I'm looking forward to watching them play, and asked them if they would sign it. it was really like meeting a couple of my folks' old friends around the same age, same generation. So yeah, it was great. And we all went in together, and just really neat walking in the venue together to watch them play. And I got to meet Paul, and he signed it and chatted for a bit, and went on to play an incredible show. Mark Walker was the drummer percussionist at that time. He was actually a local Chicagoan, and he was wonderful, and get to meet him as well. And yeah, the rest is just it is what it is. Just a wonderful group, and again, just one of the great experiences meeting them, hearing them live, and experiencing them all these years. And again, this is a great introduction to them. To this day, I'd say they're still my second favorite group. I think you all know many of you know who my first is. But yeah, if you want to get into this group, if you're not familiar, this is a good kind of, it's both simultaneously a deep end dive as well as something that'll ease you in as well. It's a good balance between those because you're hearing everything here. And yeah, it's Oregon in concert. Yep, very well worth hearing. So yeah, just wanted to come on and share that. I have a lot of ideas of what I wanted to do next, and just didn't know where to go, and feeling a little stuck and unfocused. But yeah, from playing that the other day, I thought this gives me an idea. So back with it. So I hope we're all doing as well as possible, and yeah, enjoying. Hope it's pleasant wherever you're at, and see each other soon. Well, till the next one. Peace, love, and joy.